Hey everybody, welcome to the Fired Up with CJ show. Today we're talking to Jeff Schmitt and Cynthia Bergh, who are both from the Tobacco Freedom Project. So welcome, guys.
Thank you.
Nice to see you,
S-
CJ.
So Jeff is a scientist and healer who has been using some of the techniques from Peru and North America, some from kind of shamanic traditions. And Cynthia, tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm a network chiropractor and have been working with people in a transformative space to basically make lifestyle changes through embodied work for the last
Excellent.
20 years.
Cool. Okay. And so I know that, Jeff, you actually have been studying scientifically with your research or looking at the research on neuroprotective properties of compounds found in tobacco and and then you have 24 nicotine related patents. So that's quite impressive. So you actually have the scientific chops as well as the spiritual chops. And I wanted to start off this first segment for both of you to share with us where you see the intersection of both science and spirituality coming to play.
Super. Well, I was very fortunate in the mid 90s to get involved with a very large multinational scientific consortium that was focused exclusively on solving a major question in neuroscience, and that was how does nicotine do what it does in the brain?
Hmm.
Um, right around that time, some colleagues of mine made a discovery by doing very large uh, clinical trial studies, anecdotal clinical trials, and those studies began to show a relationship, an inverse correlation between smoking and the onset of neurodegenerative disease.
Hmm.
To put it more simply, what they discovered was that if you smoked for any period, say 5 years, any time in your life, your chances of getting neurodegenerative diseases were actually quite a bit less. And if you were unfortunate enough to get the neurodegenerative disease, the onset was at a later age. So
Hmm.
what
Wow.
started emerging was a very
That's
mysterious,
shocking.
a very mysterious story.
Right.
And to make a very long story short, what we discovered was that nicotine itself is like an aerobics workout for the neuronal circuitry in your brain, especially the parts of your brain that are very susceptible to neurodegeneration. And that actually, precipitated in the greatest scientific odyssey of my career, and included taking a company to Wall Street that was focused on preventing neurodegenerative diseases. That's where all those patents came from.
Hmm.
And what was very interesting, and what connects this work to the sacred work, is that the knot of the mystery at the beginning was simply this: there's no other compound, no other plant that's ever been discovered that does what tobacco and nicotine do in the brain. And that is, you as the smoker or the person administering the tobacco to themselves actually consciously or unconsciously can guide the outcome. The tobacco can be a stimulant, a relaxant, a euphoria, a memory enhancer. There are like a dozen different, what scientists refer to as psychopharmacologies, connected to smoking. And this was a huge mystery because
Wow, that's incredible.
it
Wow.
is incredible. Yeah, it's part of the reason that this plant, using Western psychological terminology, is so addictive, because it helps you achieve cognitive and body emotional states that you wish, like nothing else does. And
Wow.
that's a very interesting and unique attribute. And it's one of the things that we have that knowledge we have leveraged in our program, because we first and foremost help people come to an understanding that this is a very powerful plant,
Mm.
and
Mm.
it's unlike alcohol or heroin or other substances of addiction because of its unique capacity to interact with the brain in the way it does.
Oh, and just let me just, for clarity's sake, and also for my ignorance, what are examples of neurodegenerative diseases?
Sure. Alzheimer's, other types of neurodegeneration, age-related dementia, Parkinson's disease, um, those sorts of things where your brain circuitry starts to break down and you start to see it physiologically, either cognitively or in muscle dysfunction, that sort of thing. There are a whole constellation of different neurodegenerative diseases that we see as a consequence of aging in modern culture.
And so tobacco actually helps all of those diseases, or is it what is it about tobacco? Because as you said, it's a kind of medicine that can calm you, excite you, increase your memory. It's up to your intention with how you use it. Is that right?
Right. So if you are lucky enough to not succumb to the negative side effects of tobacco misuse, when you get older, you have less of a chance of suffering from these neurodegenerative diseases. And
Wow.
the molecule nicotine actually imitates the most important, most prevalent neurotransmitter in our body. It's called acetylcholine. It's the neurotransmitter worker bee molecule that's responsible for everything from many aspects of brain function to all of our body's motion, all of our muscle movement,
Mm.
the functioning of our gut and our digestion, all mediated by acetylcholine. And
Mm.
nicotine looks just like it, but it has some
Mm.
unusually different properties. What neurons hate to do is to be inactive. The brain is extremely energy consuming, more so than pretty much all of the rest of your organs put together.
Mm.
And so your brain has a built-in function that when one piece of structure is sitting around doing nothing but consuming energy, the brain says, we got to get rid of that guy because it's not doing anything. And,
Mm.
and so what happens in neurodegeneration is you get one set of cells that are not doing much. This thing called programmed cell death turns on. And well, guess what? The cells right next to those cells aren't doing as much as the rest of the cells in the brain. And so programmed cell death gets turned on with them, and you get this front of cell death. Now, when nicotine is present, what happens is that it literally puts the neurons in a gymnasium and starts getting them revved up and working and reconnecting, and that prevents the programmed cell death.
Wow. Okay. So there's this trade-off, right? There's the heart attacks and lung cancer caused by nicotine versus the neurodegenerative benefits. So this seems to be the tension of the two. And so I presume that part of your work is how can you get the benefits without some of these downsides? Is that the equation?
That is a big piece of it. And what's interesting is if you do a survey of indigenous cultures worldwide, what you find is that any person who uses tobacco as a sacred healing tool or a sacrament, they basically, the first thing they tell you is never put tobacco smoke in your lungs because it'll kill you, it'll make you sick. The way that the tobacco is used, the way that the tobacco is understood and related to, is completely different. And remember, we talked about the matter of intention having an effect on the outcome. This is such a beautiful metaphor for so many issues that we face in our world today, is that it's a perfect example of how you relate to something that you bring into your life. The thing that indigenous masters will tell you is that you can tell the tobacco in the sacred context that I need help with insight about whether my crops are going to grow this year, or how I can be of service to my brother or sister in their sickness, and you actually get a very specific and different outcome. And globally, where tobacco grows naturally or where it's been adopted in sacred use, this plant is understood and revered as the most powerful and most sacred of all of the plants.
Yeah, so then in shamanic practices, they talk about plant medicine. And
Yes.
part of that plant medicine, oftentimes in shamanic rituals, will be tobacco that you actually have as part of a ceremony where you're giving the tobacco as like thanking the spirits. And so it's kind of now you're kind of tapping, it sounds like tapping into that idea that this is like sacred plant medicine, but you don't have to inhale it.
That's
Don't
exactly
inhale.
right. And it's
Cynthia,
about
tell me.
And
relationships.
well, I think in the learning too was once you connected with the indigenous cultures and started to learn about this other story about grandfather tobacco, it really created a new perspective of the scientific research that you were getting. It's like, this is why it's showing up as a Swiss Army knife, why it has so many different functions, is the fact that it is a sacred plant teacher, and that it does have this intelligence and kind of interaction. So
Mm,
I think his own personal healing journey as he went through that created a whole new understanding of where he had been, in the research
Exactly.
lab. So
so were either of you smokers before engaging in this project?
not
No.
not before this project, but many years ago, right before I went to chiropractic school, I was dating a smoker, and so I started smoking. And I know when I went to chiropractic school, I was making all these healthy choices and there were two things that I couldn't get out of my life. I was having a problem with binge drinking,
Hmm.
getting really sick, and I was still smoking, and it didn't make sense. There was so much
Mm,
conflict in my life because I'm like, here I am, I'm so interested in healthy lifestyles, I'm making all these good choices in all these other realms, and I couldn't understand why I couldn't, have control, or I couldn't dictate this behavior. It felt
yeah, that's
very
interesting.
much
So,
felt that. So that was, 23 years ago, kind of where I started on my own
mm,
personal, growth healing. And that transitioned very quickly. And then since then it's been 23 years of my own experience, like cultivating and changing my life, and then helping support other people to understand these resources are really at their fingertips. So
yeah, it's interesting because a lot of the indigenous cultures, they have mushrooms, there's ayahuasca, there's like all these plant, even alcohol is made out of plants. Like there are these wonderful healing properties that these plants have, yet somehow we don't like somehow we're not quite in tune with them necessarily and we get addicted to them.
yeah, well, it speaks to that harmony of nature. I
Mm,
think it seems like a long time ago, uh, as humans, we decided to kind of leave nature. We started this war, and there was this idea of domination or controlling
hmm.
the environment, and it's really not about that. It's so infinitely wise that our growth and understanding, and then this program. It's really about harmonizing and respect, and when we come into something that's intelligence, you can't control it. That leads to disaster,
Hmm.
or try to dominate it. But what we do is develop into a relationship, just like you would with your spouse or your partner. It's kind of this respect of, I hear you, and this is how we build a relationship, is with
Mm,
respect. So it's really a
Different
different ball
perspective.
game.
Wendell Berry says one of the ways that we've fallen from a deep connection to the living world is that we now in the industrialized world consider ourselves being among a collection of objects where our indigenous earth connected brothers and sisters are in a communion of subjects, which implies that there is sentience, that there is intelligence, that there's a living essence within all things. And many traditions, especially South American traditions, actually honor certain plants, quote unquote, teacher plants, as ancient, sentient, individuated intelligences that have worked and co-evolved with humanity since time immemorial. And the path of the vegetalista, as they're called, is the path of actually um, letting go of human teachers at a particular point and actually taking on plants as your teachers. And this is what I did in my path as a vegetalista, not only with tobacco but with another sacred plant. And these plants only work in their full capacity when we treat them no differently than we would being in council with the Dalai Lama or with Mother Teresa. These are ancient intelligences. And when we do
mm,
that, it very much shifts the equation. It very much shifts the way that the plant interacts with our bodies and our physiology. And this has actually been, borne out in in scientific paradigms, that our intention and relationship to these plants and interacting with phytochemicals is so sophisticated and so ancient that our minds actually have a tremendous capacity to impact outcomes. And this is pretty much lost on a lot of Western science
Okay.
and Western thought.
Okay, so I'm going to actually, we're going to move on to part two. We've been
Okay.
talking to Jeffrey Schmitt and Cynthia Bergh, both of tobaccofreedom.net, the Tobacco Project. And we're going to talk about, let's continue the conversation about our relationship with plant medicine and how we can have an honorable, respectful relationship versus the one that we have right now. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
It means so much to me that you're listening to the show. Would love your support in any way by giving me comments below, or to subscribe to the show or share the show with friends. Thank you again for your support. Love and blessings.